get it changed on the main page or whatever, but they
Yeah.
didn't change it in this other, so
Well,
that's another. But,
I just want to let you know I got it, I just.
and honestly, get those, when we have, I never open it up because I don't depend on that to bring in
And
stuff.
I think I've seen it emailed before,
You can go back.
but it was just a statement. So
Yeah, I opened it up and I was like,
You do this?
oh wait, that's tax day. What must have
I wasn't sure if anybody said anything. Did you been reminded or? Okay. Just, I don't want you to go into, that you would be ignorant of the fact. Yep. Tomorrow's tax day. Even more.
she has, well, I don't know if I talked, well, I think I told you, but I talked to
Did you tell Eric too? You might want to tell Eric.
do the permanent installation.
Did you hear it?
I'm sorry, I walked over there.
Oh, yeah.
You will?
Trust me, we all know.
You don't have to leave.
Are you on the move?
I'm on the move. You know, when you find it.
I have no idea.
It's funny because years when I was working, you were oh, I like to garden. I don't want to weed whack, I don't want to tree bushes. That's the front, I do that.
Oh, we're gonna look at a transfer.
Got four.
Yeah.
Here, Lisa.
For y'all's payroll.
Well, we have a meeting there, supposed to be. I know.
I warned you about tax day and you let me know that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we
Did you send it to me? I gave you a copy, paper copy, a while back, and that was the one that I said, it's gone. Just have email. Yeah, that's fine. It's, when I get those envelopes, I put them where they're supposed to go, and oftentimes, they don't get where they need
That's Connie's last name. I said, it's just Connie.
They traditionally send you with the paper. They just send it to people.
Good morning. All right, good to see everybody here today. We're going to go ahead and get started. We'll let the sister find a seat though. Hope everybody's doing well. Tax day tomorrow. I had to remind Roger, tomorrow's tax day. Oh, and Eric too, he didn't know. So one last day of rejoicing. And then we file.
Or angst. and
What does it say, tonight, we eat and drink, for tomorrow we die? So, yeah. All right, so I think that's everybody's gonna come in for the moment anyway. So let's go ahead and start with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for the day that you blessed us with, and we're thankful, Lord, that you are our God. We're thankful, Lord, that we serve a loving God that watches for us and cares for us. And we pray, Lord, that you continue to do that. In spite of all of the things that we do that are in opposition to you, we know that you still love us and that you want us to live with you for eternity. We pray, Lord, that you bless us with an understanding of the word and a heart that is softened and is able to take correction and instruction. We're thankful, Lord, for the word that you provided for us. We're thankful that we can go as far back as we want into it. There's still lessons for us even today. We pray, Lord, that you help us to understand those lessons and, when possible, apply them to our own lives. We ask, Lord, that you bless the sick that we know of who are from this congregation and friends of our members here or family or anyone that we might know of that is having issues with their health. We pray, Lord, that you bless them with that measure of health that they desire. If not, Lord, give them a measure of peace and comfort. We ask that you be with those who are traveling, those who may be on their way here this morning. We ask that you give them safe passage. Be with those who are out, who are from this number, who are traveling to other places. Bring them back to us safely so that we can assemble together again. We especially, Lord, thank you for your Son, Jesus. We're thankful for the sacrifice that he offered up on that cross so that we could have a hope of a home in heaven with you. It's through his name we pray. Amen. All right, let's see. We are in chapter 19. Thank you. I guess I'm doing announcements today.
I think it's supposed to be the top of it.
I guess it is. No, that's all right. I'm happy to do it. Oh, turn it down. Today, we are going to be studying chapters 19 through 21 of Joshua. So we'll go ahead and turn to chapter 19. Really, the last couple of chapters up to this point, they have been allotting areas for the tribes. That's what we've been talking about. But we haven't really been talking about the various boundaries and all that kind of stuff. Here's the map of it. It meant a lot to them. It was particular to them. It was designed specifically for that particular tribe. But yeah.
Where's your daughter?
Sorcery. I don't know. I don't know.
Just go back to school. There's no idea.
All right. Hold on. There we go. All right. Don't look at my search bar up there. I don't know what's up there. All right. So anyway, in chapter 19, let's just look at the very beginning of it. This is the inheritance for whom? Simeon. It says the second lot came out for Simeon, and for the tribe of the people of Simeon according to their clans, and their inheritance was in the midst of the inheritance of the people of Judah. So this chapter is dealing these territories assigned to the remaining 6 tribes. The first of these remaining 6 was Simeon. You'll notice that no boundaries here are listed at all, just the 17 cities. And you can read all of these cities. We're not going to, but you could read them if you like. But I want you to look at, go to Genesis chapter 49. Genesis chapter 49. We'll see as we go through the remainder of the book of Joshua and into Judges where many of the tribes began to diminish while the other tribes began to embiggen, whatever it is. They're going to get bigger while some tribes are going to get small. And eventually some of the tribes basically disappear. Not that the people disappeared, but they began to be absorbed into the other tribes that got bigger and bigger and waxed more numerous. We're going to see that. And I'll actually have we'll have some dates or roundabout time frame of when some of the tribes basically just disappeared and it began to narrow down and narrow down and narrow down. They still existed, but the amount of property that they had basically diminished and diminished and diminished. And sometimes they dissipated into the other tribes. So anyway, all right. So who has Genesis chapter 49, verses 5 through 7? Anybody want to read that? Yes, thank you.
Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel.
Okay, all right. So what's happening here with this, when it says that the tribe of Simeon is going to be, they're going to attain an inheritance in the midst of their inheritance. So where's Simeon? Simeon is down here, and it's in what? It's technically in the land that's ascribed to the tribe of Judah. So what's going on in chapter 49 of Genesis? What's the occasion that we have this? All right, so Jacob's bringing them all. He's about to pass from this life, and he wants to give to his sons, all of his sons, the blessing that would come to them, and his pronouncement it is a pronouncement of judgment. This is not merely his thinking, his mind process. This is something that is going, when he gives this to them, when he ascribes this to them, God hears. And what does God do? He gives them exactly what their father said that it was going to happen. So look what he says. He says, I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So we have Simeon down here that's kind of spread out amongst the tribe of Judah. Who's the other brother? Levi. Levi does not what? They don't have a land inheritance. So what does God do? He scatters them throughout the other tribes. And we'll see that here in just a couple of moments. We'll see where the tribe of Levi is mentioned. All right. Let's go to verses 10 through 16. And I won't read all of this, but I'll read some of it. The third lot came up for the people of who? Zebulun, according to their clans. And the territory of their inheritance reached as far as Sarid. And he goes through, boundary goes up westward, and then the brook that is east of this, and it goes the other direction eastward to the sunrise of the boundary. So it was very particular, very specific, isn't it? Kind of interesting. You know, today, are people particular about their boundary lines? Have you ever had a neighbor that's like, okay, we'll just have somebody come out and we'll do a property search. That's what we'll do. You know, we'll have what do they call them? Surveyor. I don't know why I almost said prospector. It's a little man with a pickaxe, you know. This surveyor, you're going to have a surveyor come in. What is he going to do? He's going to, now today, they've got all kinds of stuff. They've got GPS coordinates. They've got all this stuff. They can really lay out a boundary line. Why? Because land is important, right? What is it? They're not, you know, buy land. They're not making any more of it. So land was important. It's important today. If you've got a piece of property and you might have a obstinate neighbor, you might have a neighbor that you're not getting along with, and you want to have a clear, defined property line. That's perfectly understandable. Well, these were the same. They were the same way. Land inheritance, that and children we talked about before, were the defining factor for the families of the Israelites. You know, where was your land? Where were you located? What tribe were you in? And it was very particular about where it was. And now, once they kind of defined these boundary lines, once it got inside of there, you had clan leaders, you had tribal leaders who would then divvy up the rest of it. This was coming from Joshua and the high priest. They were the ones issuing the boundaries for the bigger pieces of property, the tribal boundaries. But then once those were set out, you would get a certain portion of it that would be yours. And it would be an inheritance. It would be yours to be passed down to your children and your children's children and so forth and so on. The Lord was very, very strict when it came to what it took for you to lose that piece of property or to sell that piece of property or have that piece of property redeemed or so forth and so on. So anyway, we go through. You read through all of this and you look at. It's interesting in verse 15. There's a town that looks very familiar to us. Katath, that's not it. Nahalal, Shimron, Adalah, and Bethlehem. But the Bethlehem here is not the Bethlehem of Jesus Christ, just so you know. It was named by the Zebulunites after the one where Jesus was born. So there was already a Bethlehem. They named this Bethlehem after that one. So don't think that this is the one where Jesus was born. All right, so and as I'm doing this research, I'm researching people who are a lot smarter than I am, and a lot more knowledgeable, well-read about this type of activity than I am. So I'm going to give you some, as we go through, I'm going to give you some quotations from these people. The wisdom of the Lord has been pointed out in this placement of the children of Leah. Remember, you've got 4 different groups of people here. All right, you've got wives and you've got handmaidens, and all of them had children, and all of those children were given that because they were all of Jacob. No other man is mentioned, but there's 4 women that are all their children are sharing this land. But the wisdom of the Lord has been pointed out in this placement of the children of Leah to the north of the Rachel tribes in order to procure a greater unity of the children of Israel. And this objective was accomplished for centuries. In other words, it took quite a while for these tribes to kind of gel into a cohesive unit that came about during David, because there were issues, and we'll see that when we get into the book of Judges. Tribes did not always get along very well, and in many cases strove against one another, but it's something to remember as we go through it. All right, so verses 17 through 23. The 4th lot came out for whom? Issachar, for the people of Issachar according to their clans. The lot of Issachar was comprised of the plain of Esdraelon, which was part of the richest land in this particular area. But nothing really outstanding is pretty much attributed to this tribe after this. You don't read about the tribe of Issachar. No great feat came out of the tribe of Issachar, except for the one which is the Battle of Tabor. So if you want to go through the various wars and fights and everything like that, you can see a little bit more about the tribe of Issachar, but that's pretty much it. All right, verses 24 through 31. So you have the 5th lot came out for the tribe of Asher. Then you have the tribe, hold on a second. So in 24 through 31, the tribes of Asher, Zebulun, and Issachar all joined Manasseh on the south. And you can, read through that. Asher was the westernmost of these particular tribes and claimed the seacoast from Mount Carmel to Tyre, but the tribe's control of all that area was tenuous at best. And we're going to see down here when we get to the end of our discussion this morning where, well, we'll see it when we get there. We'll put on that. Verses 32 through 39, you have the 6th lot came out for the people of Naphtali. Naphtali's border joined that of Issachar from Mount Tabor to the Jordan. Verses 40 through 48, the 7th lot came out for the tribe of the people of Dan, according to their clans. We're going to look at verses 40, let's see, 47. Let's look at verse 47. When the territory of the people of Dan was lost to them, the people of Dan went up and fought against Leshem, and after capturing it and striking it with a sword, they took possession of it and settled in it, calling Leshem Dan after the name of Dan, their ancestor. This is the inheritance of the tribe of the people of Dan according to their clans. These cities were their villages. So when the territory of the people of Dan was what? Lost to them. So what happened to the people of Dan? They had a piece of property, but what happened? They couldn't handle it. They couldn't keep it. And we'll see down as we get a little bit further why they could not keep the property that was given to them. The Lord said He's going to give their enemies into their hands, but something happened that didn't quite work out the way they wanted to. But anyway, Dan loses their land. So what do? They go and they take another piece of land I've read a little bit of it, and this is the area was described as too small for Dan, the tribe, but really Dan's really just preferred to live somewhere else. In Judges 18, we'll see where it's going to talk about their migration northward. So we'll see that in Judges 18. This tribe did not figure particularly significantly in the history of Israel after this particular point, but they did have one hero, and we're going to read about him in Judges. But his exploits, everything that he did, seemed to be confined to a kind of a smaller territory, and that hero is anybody? It's in Judges. He was a judge. No. Strong man. Here we go. So we'll see about Samson as we get into the book of Judges. All right. Let's see. So all of the territories have been settled. All of the allotments have been given out. The inheritances are theirs. The Lord has given the land into their hands. He's given their enemies into their hands. And now it's really up to the tribes to keep their territory. Does that mean that God said, well, I've given it to you, I'm backing away and I'm not going to help you anymore, I'm kind of out of this? Of course not. Of course not. Because remember the promise that was given to them. It was a reciprocal thing, wasn't it? If you will obey, then I will be your God. And what that means is I will be your protector. I will make sure that your enemies cannot make inroads against you. I will make sure of all of these things, but you have to be obedient. Okay? If you're not obedient, then I am going to give you over to them. I will withdraw my protection. And we see that in Judges, don't we? They withdraw from God, they go into idolatry, and then God sends a tormentor, he sends an oppressor, and then the people say, oh, we're sorry. We're coming back, Lord, we're coming back. And then they come back for a period of time, and then God says, I'm going to send a redeemer. So he's going to send someone that's going to execute judgment on God's enemies. And then they'll live in peace for a little while, but as all things are cyclical, what's going to happen? They're going to go back into idolatry. God's going to say, all right, you're in a timeout, so to speak. I'm going to send some people to oppress you, and that's what happens. And then the cycle repeats itself, and it goes away all that way through the book of Judges and farther. This is just what we read about. This happens over and over and over again. All right? So, anyway, with that in mind, let's look at verse 49 of chapter 19. When they had finished distributing the several territories of the land as inheritances, the people of Israel gave an inheritance among them to Joshua, the son of Nun. I think that's perfectly appropriate, right? You reward someone who has done a good job. And Joshua did a fantastic job. He did not let up from anything God told him to do. Does that mean that he was flawless and he made no mistakes? No, not at all. He made a couple of mistakes. But thankfully, they were not mistakes that were of everlasting importance. They were not things that crippled the nation of Israel from this point in time. All right? So they said, we're going to give him an inheritance. It's interesting. They give him a city, Timnath Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim, and he rebuilt the city and settled in it. Interesting, though, the exact location of this is not really known. Now, it may have been found in recent history, but I've not found anything on that particular city. But they gave him an entire town that was Joshua's and Joshua's alone. So he was up in Ephraim, which is the northern part of the nation, and he lived there until he passed from this life, and he made that great statement that we read about, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. All right. Anybody got anything they want to add to, anything they want to add to this? Got one more thing. In verse 51, and again, I'm giving you a little bit of information from other people. The division of Canaan among the tribes was conducted in all fairness and in such a manner as to absolutely preclude any charges of partiality or deceit. The high priest who presided over the religion of Israel, the military leader of the nation, and the heads of the fathers' houses of the clans, the princes of Israel, were all present to oversee and conduct the casting of lots, which probably was done by Joshua. Oh, come on now. Imagination. All right? All right, so we're going to go on to chapter 20. Anybody have anything they want to ask or add or any commentary that you got? Is God faithful concerning his promises? What did he say he was going to do? Yes, sir.
Simeon was at some point just absorbed into Judah.
Yes.
As Judah.
Yes. Yeah. It was, and it's interesting because they talk about the northern tribes and the southern tribes, and they still list the tribes even though the people had basically been consumed. Now, that's a lot of different reasons for that, and we'll look at a couple of these as we go a little bit further on. There's a reason that the land began to diminish and that other tribes began to flourish. There's a reason for it, and it's not always a negative. There's not always foul play involved in this, although sometimes there is. Dan simply didn't like where they were, and they wanted something else. They did not do what they were supposed to do in order to keep the land. They didn't want it, so they let it go, and then they went and took another place that they weren't really entitled to. Why? Because their territory had been ascribed to them, and they did not do what was necessary in order to keep it. But yes, we'll see a lot of those tribes. That happens to several of the tribes. All right? So God's faithful concerning his promises. He gave the land into their hands. He gave their enemies into their hands. Now he says, I'm still going to fight your battles for you, but you have to be faithful. And if you're faithful, I will fight. If your enemy comes against you, you don't need to worry about it. But if you're not going to be faithful, then your enemies are going to be able to come and they're going to be able to take you. They're going to put you into slavery. They're going to put you into subjugation. You'll pay tribute to these people that before were paying tribute to you. And unfortunately, a lot of the tribes, well, at some point, almost all the tribes had gone into outright idolatry. It wasn't a marginal thing. It was an outright, full-blown, they were worshiping false gods. Every man was doing what seemed right in his sight. In some cases, it was a matter of worshiping God alongside an idol. In some cases, it was supplanting God completely with one of those Canaanite idols from one of the tribes that they didn't do their job in pushing out of the land. Okay? All right. Nobody has anything else?
One more comment.
Yes, sir.
The deathbed blessings of Jacob on his sons, wasn't that more prophetic than his just pronouncing?
Yes.
This was prophecy given to him.
Yes, there was prophecy. There was prophecy involved in that. If you look at some of the things he said, and we talked about this last week a little bit, right? What happened to the tribes was not just merely his idea about what might happen to the tribes. It came true exactly the way. Jacob's nowhere around here, is he? He's not in the story at all. The only thing we find is his pronouncement of the blessings and the cursings way back almost on his deathbed. But yet we still see where Jacob's words still are true, even while they had plenty of time to work behind the scenes, didn't they, to make sure that whatever was pronounced against Levi and Simeon would not come true. They had plenty of time to work behind the scenes to make sure that's not going to happen, that's not going to happen, yet it still happened. So what can we reasonably glean from that is that God had a hand in the pronouncement of those blessings, and he had a hand in what was going on in the distribution of the land and what was happening to those various tribes and what was going to be their end what was going to be their end in the end. So we can't deny that. God has a hand in every bit of this all the way through. All right? He had a hand in what happened to Jacob. He had a hand in what happened to Joshua. I had a hand in what happened to Abraham, and all of these people. You see where when something was said with authority, that's exactly what happened. All right? Okay, so let's look at chapter 20. This is, anybody's got a chapter heading? What does it say there?
6 cities of refuge.
Okay, the cities of refuge. So we've got 6 cities of refuge, right? We've got Kadesh, we've got Hebron, we've got Shechem, we've got Bezer, and we've got Ramoth Gilead, and we've got Golan. All right? So the purpose of these cities, who can tell me what the purpose of the cities of refuge were?
To house those people who accidentally killed someone.
Okay.
They could stay in the city of refuge until the high priest died.
Okay. It was a place where someone who may have been guilty of taking a life, but it was an unintentional taking of a life. And that, listen, it happens way more than you think. Unintended manslaughter. There was no intent to kill someone, but someone was killed. Now, here's the thing. This is a way in which it's difficult for us to understand. In this day and age, when someone commits capital murder, and there may be the death penalty attached to that, who takes care of that? The state, right? The government takes care of that. So we have a city, state, now, not that cities can enact the death penalty, but we have city government, we have local government, we have state government, we have federal government. And when you look at the idea of taking a life, which is the ultimate penalty for a crime, I think we'll all admit that that's the top level, and the ability to do that is very, very narrow. You have to I think you have to fit a very, very narrow criteria in order to have your life taken. But when it's done by the state. You notice that it's not done by the family. You see that all the time. I think the families ought to be able to do that I don't know if you really want that, but maybe you do. It's just the anger that's built up against somebody that may have taken of the life of one of your family members. You want vengeance. That's just not working.
That's where you're standing.
Yeah.
Is it where I am? Oh, there's a speaker. And then there's a speaker. I'll stand right here. Who designed this? But in our society, we don't have to worry about that. The state arrests someone, they try them. If they're found guilty and there's a death penalty, then they take care of that. But you didn't have that kind of a government back then, did you? What did you have? What system of government did you have? It was. I'm sorry.
Mosaical.
Yeah, the law was very, very strict. It was very set out about who could be found guilty. I mean, it prescribed the death penalty, number one, and it said who was to be the recipient of the death penalty, number two. But it doesn't say who's to carry that out in specific circumstances. Now, so what happens? Let's look at this scenario. You have a man, and he's out, and he gets into an argument with somebody, and they tussle and they fight, and all of a sudden one of them accidentally winds up dead. Had no intention of killing somebody, but because of the nature of the fight, all of a sudden you have somebody that's been killed. Now, in our nomenclature, we would use the term manslaughter. All right, it's not murder because there was no malice aforethought. It was just, hey, we're fighting, and I'm going to get a couple licks in. He's going to get a couple licks in, but I hit him too hard, accidentally in the wrong place, and now there's a man dead. I had no intention of doing it. There's still someone dead. And what does it say? Blood for blood. Life for life. So now what do you have? You have a family that says, hey, you've killed our whatever, son, father, grandfather, uncle, whoever it might be. You have to pay for this. And we want blood. And all things considered, that's understandable. So what happens? This man who had no intention of killing somebody, but he can flee to one of these 6 cities of refuge and he can remain there. Now, it doesn't mean that nothing happens to him. It means that he can run there before what's called the avenger of blood that may be hired by the family or the town or whoever it may be. They pursue him, he runs, he flees, he gets to the city of refuge. He can stay there, he has sanctuary, so to speak, and he can remain there until there is a trial. There is a trial. Okay, it doesn't mean that he gets to go and nothing ever happens to him. No. It means that they can't catch him and kill him before he gets there. All right? He gets there, he cries out for sanctuary, he's allowed into the city and he can remain there. There's a trial, and if he's found guilty, what happens? Yes, they have to turn him over. I mean, it's like, you killed somebody. No, I didn't, it was an accident. Well, we've determined that it was not an accident. You had animosity towards this person. You did this, and because of the trial, now this person you've been found guilty. We were going to turn you over for punishment. Now, it does not mean that the people had to kill. That death penalty wasn't required of them. They could say, listen, we'll have mercy, but you have to pay a substantial fine. I mean, we know it may not have been guilty, but you did kill him, and now you've got to pay the consequences for it. But it was an accident. But you've got to pay, all right? So anyway, there's a specific reason behind these cities of refuge. This was not for some low-life scoundrel who went on a killing spree that he could run and nothing could happen to him. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. They see the city of refuge and they think, well, that's ridiculous. Why in the world should somebody be able to go and get away with it? They don't. They don't. The whole purpose behind there. Now, if he was found innocent, he could stay, because you might have a family that says, we don't care what the verdict was. We think he was guilty. And they could, that avenger of blood could remain and wait and wait and wait. And when he leaves, he's got him. He's forbidden to go into the city to get him, but if he leaves on his own, so this innocent person who was found innocent but still might fear for their life could stay in that city until the high priest dies. He was free to live there as long as was necessary. Hopefully maybe people's anger will subside a little bit. But listen, how many times have we seen of a feud that lasted for years and years and years and years and years, right? Hatfields and McCoys. I did a little bit of research. That's a wow, what a jaw dropper. We want our pound of flesh. Why? Yeah.
Well, and that idea of vengeance goes all the way back to Cain and Abel. That's why God acted
Yeah.
to protect Cain from
Where can I go? Somebody's going to find me and kill me. Because the word's gotten out. And that's, again, goes into the idea of Cain and Abel. It It wasn't Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel were the only 4 people on earth, right? You know, there were many other people that were living at that time. And Abel, if he was a good man, probably was well known for being a good man. And Cain would fear for his life. Hey, there may be somebody who wants to take my life for killing him, which would be understandable. So they put this mark, and now they have these cities of refuge. So they're able to flee to those places. All right? So it's the protection, not of criminals generally, but of innocent man who had accidentally killed someone. All right? It was designed to eliminate these blood feuds, which were bountiful back in history.
How long did they have these cities of refuge? Because in the New Testament, we don't read about that, or, you know, Paul couldn't take off to a city of refuge. He was stoned, and,
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying.
you know, it was immediate.
I would imagine,
That was
well,
Roman.
it depends, yeah, a part of it depended on, because the cities of refuge were populated by the Levites. And it's probable that a lot of those cities were no longer under their control anyway, so they would not have the ability. And Roman law overshadowed everything else. They were allowed to practice to a certain point, but one of the things that the Romans did not allow the Jews at that time to do was enact capital punishment. They had taken that ability away from them, which this just goes to show the mindset. These folks are just it's incredible. They have such an unusual mindset. They were angry that the Romans had taken away their ability to enact capital punishment. They were angry at it. But it had been said, and this is through history, that capital punishment was almost unheard of among the Jews. But they were angry that they couldn't do it anymore. So it was just the idea of taking away that religious liberty that they had, even though they never exercised that religious liberty. It was said that I'm trying to remember a Sanhedrin. If one stoning had occurred in 10 or 15, 20 years, it was considered to be a bloody Sanhedrin. If they had executed one person, it was considered to be a bloody Sanhedrin, and it was almost it was not thought of well that you would take somebody's life, even though that was part of law that they were supposed to be abiding by. They had gone to the other way in the extreme. They were not doing what they should have been doing, and it allowed for, criminal. Remember, they're secular and the religious law are the same. Criminal activity that was both religious crime and secular crime. So anyway.
Perfectly willing to use it to have Christ crucified.
Well,
Liked it all right.
they were perfectly fine to have the Romans do it for them. See, what that did was that absolved them of any wrongdoing, even though they were the ones responsible for it. So.
You think of Stephen and Paul were both stoned, but in the Old Testament, they stoned rebellious children, so.
And the interesting thing about just getting off a little bit, the interesting thing about the stoning of Stephen is that would not have occurred, I think, about a year before that, because the Romans had actually withdrawn a lot of their troops out of Palestine to quell some sort of civil disturbance closer to Rome. So all of the people that would have been a check against the stoning of Stephen had been withdrawn, and the Roman influence was there to keep that from happening. Stephen just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people in charge, because the Romans wouldn't have allowed it to happen. They would have kept that from occurring, and there you go. Just goes to show. All right. In chapter 20 and verse 6, let's see, verse 6, and he shall remain in that city until he has stood before the congregation for judgment, until the death of him who is high priest at the time. The idea of this, the stand before the congregation, or stand before the congregation for judgment, is a reference to the judgment exercised by the congregation of the city of refuge, which was made up primarily of Levites. These were the people who dispensed the law. These were the people who defined the law. They explained the law. Okay? So the manslayer, the man who had killed the man, could not leave that city except to forfeit his life. And it would appear that no such congregational judgment took place until the manslayer was accused by the avenger of blood, and who in that case would have had the right to produce witnesses. Upon the presumption that the manslayer would be acquitted, he then could live in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. If found guilty, he was, of course, handed over to the avenger of blood, who had the right to execute him. He also had the right to carry him back, trussed up to the family that he wronged, and they could say, well, listen, we don't want him dead, You know, what happened if you had, what would happen if you had a family member kill another family member? So you've got two men, one of them's dead, well, we want him executed, now you've got two men dead, so you've got two widows, two sets of orphans, instead of saying, okay, we don't want him dead, but we require a price of such and such. It's interesting that the Lord gave standards for what the life of a person was worth. Not their inherent worth, but their physical worth, what that would mean to the family, what they could reasonably ask for in the price of a life. So we gotta be careful that we don't look at that the wrong way. It's like, well, no, human life's only worth this much. No, that has nothing to do with it. It's a matter of how can the family be provided for, what is the appropriate amount to fine someone. Even if you go to jail, if you've ever convicted of murder in today's day and age, they're going to enact a fine on you. And does that mean that means that that's the person's worth of the person you killed? No, of course not. All right, I'm not going to worry about it anymore. All right, everybody knows what a type and an antitype is, correct? We're aware of that biblical principle. We have a type and we have an antitype. What's an example of a type in the Old Testament? The ark, Noah's ark, right? That's the type. What's the antitype? Baptism, right? Being put into Christ, okay? Baptism is the antitype of the protection of the people in the ark. So we're going to look at it. We're going to look at real quick a type antitype in regards to the cities of refuge. All right. So the typical meaning for the cities of refuge is, number one, it's a place of refuge, right? It's a place of refuge. That's the whole point behind it. Cities of refuge is a place of refuge. So we know that the antitype, there is a place, a refuge provided for sinners in whom? Jesus Christ. Number two, safety was found in the city of refuge and nowhere else. Anywhere else you fled, the avenger of blood could take you, could execute you on the spot, could take you back to town where you might not get the very fair trial that you would get in the city of refuge. So number two, safety is in the city of refuge. That's the type. The antitype is that safety is in Christ, not anywhere else. And if you leave Christ, what? That's number three. If you leave Christ, there is no place of safety for you. If you left the place of refuge, city of refuge, there was no safety for you. Now you may get somewhere and you may hide out for a little while, but you're always thinking the word might get out. And they might find out where I am. And they might come and they might trust me up and drag me back because there was no statute of limitations on murder. That was a lifelong thing, kind of like it is today. There's no statute of limitations, I don't believe, in any state of the union on murder. I think murder is an open-ended case. They find you 50 years from now and you're a 90-year-old man doddering around, they could still put you on trial. Will they? They probably will, simply to have a trial and say, yes, she's guilty. Will they put you in prison? Maybe not. Maybe not, I don't know. All right, so you've got the type, which is the city of refuge, and you've got the antitype, which is Jesus Christ. All right, so we must abide in him to be saved, John 15, verses 6. And the safety continued throughout the life of the high priest. So safety continues for repentant sinners throughout the dispensation of the age of Jesus Christ. I like that. We have a place of refuge. I like because one of them is called what? Ramoth Gilead. There is a balm in Gilead. All right. Let's see. Ooh, okay. Let's move along. Chapter 20, verses 1 through 42. Sorry, hold on. That'd be chapter 21. Verses 1 through 42. These are the 48 cities of the Levites. They are spread out amongst the tribes in each of their territories. Hold on a second. Yeah. They are spread out throughout the tribes in each of their territories. In all of these assignments of their lands and all of these assignments of their cities, it needs to be remembered that the Levites were not the sole possessors of those cities or the rulers of those cities. They were cities that were prescribed for the Levites. They could live there. They could have their own homes. They could have lands where they had pastures where they could either have livestock or they could plant and all of these things, but they did not own the cities. That was part of the law. That was part of how the land was ascribed to the people. They did not have an inheritance. Right? They had no land to pass down to their yes.
Would the Levites, once they've gone to these cities, I'm assuming they would not
I don't think it had anything to do with it. I mean,
I mean, then
let's say
are they
that.
still Levites at that point if they did?
Yes, because it all came through the father. So you had a Levitical father and he married a Zebulonite woman, their children would be Levites. Yeah, because it all came through. It was the patriarchy. Patriarchy is at fault in that. So-
John's father was a Levite.
Yes.
John the Baptizer's father was a Levite.
Yeah.
But he married a Judah, a woman from Judah, the tribe of Judah.
Yeah.
Where Jesus and John were cousins.
Yeah, it was common for intermarriage. And while God was mainly concerned that they not marry from the outside nations. Marrying within the tribes was not really a problem, but you would have tribes that, we don't marry from that tribe.
The
Imagine that.
only prescription against intermarrying in the tribes was if you had daughters who had inherited land, they could only marry within their tribe.
Kept it within the tribe.
Back in chapter 17, the daughters of Zelophehad.
Yeah,
There was they went to the leaders and asked for the land because there were no sons.
Right.
But then there were very, very strict instructions about
And
what
it's
they did and how they married and all of
yeah, because if they married outside, their husband's tribe would now own that property because of because of their marriage. And the whole point was to keep that land within the tribes. So it all passed down from that, and which is kind of interesting because very rarely within the nations that surrounded them did you have that kind of protections. Most of the time, women could not own property. They did not have that right to do that. And within, Judaism, they did. There was protections going on, but they had to go and they had to petition for that. That was not something that was automatic. But, it's interesting that the people when they went to petition them, they said, that's reasonable. Sure. If there's no heirs, then yes, the property should belong to the only people that, that can own it. But if you do that, then you have to marry within the tribe so that it remains within the tribe and it can be an inheritance within the tribe.
Did
All right.
you say 48 cities?
48 cities of the Levites. Yes.
Which included the 6 cities of refuge.
Included 6 cities of refuge. So you had 42 extra, 48 in total. Let's see. Let's look at real quick because, man, this is going to work out just fine. Verses 43 through 45. And this reads, "Thus the Lord gave to Israel all of the land that he swore to give to their fathers." Remember we talked about the issue that we've got now, people who believe that the Lord did not completely fulfill the land promise and it's still out there. And that's why the current nation of Israel is entitled to that land. And God is going to make sure that they get it, even if it means, and I heard yesterday that Iran launched a drone strike on Israel. Of course, how now you have people that are just shrieking from the rooftops, this is it, this is it. God's getting ready to destroy the whole thing, and he's going to give it all back to them, and you have that. This is the issue that you find. But we see, as far back as Joshua chapter 21, verse 43, the Lord gave to Israel all the land that he swore to give to their fathers. That promise has been fulfilled. It was fulfilled back then. And it did not stop. The land was theirs as long as they could hold it. And that was the problem. They went into idolatry and they couldn't hold it anymore because they couldn't stand up against their enemies. And they took possession of it, again, fulfilling the prophecy. He gave them the land, they took possession of it, and they settled there. That should settle the issue. Unfortunately, we still have people, even members of the Lord's church. I've talked to people who are Zionists in the Lord's church, and I think, kind of an oxymoron, just to make any sense. This doesn't fly. What you're telling me is going to happen has already happened. You can read it here. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he has sworn to their fathers. Not one of all their enemies had withstood them. Yes, why? Because God was at the head of the battle at that time. Right? For the Lord had given all of their enemies into their hands. He did at that time. Up to this point, that's exactly what had occurred. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass. God is not slack concerning his promises, as some count slackness, but is what? Faithful. He's going to do what he says he's going to do. When we see that the children of Israel began to lose their territories, it is not because God was not in control. Well, it was because God was not in control. They gave themselves over to idolatry, and God was no longer in control. That's why they started losing their territories. All these people that they had kicked out says, they're weak. They're weak. We got them. And they start coming in, they start making inroads. They start taking stuff from them. We're going to see that as we go a little bit further on, but anyway. I'll see this real quickly. John Calvin stated this: nothing but their own cowardice prevented them from enjoying the blessings of God in all their fullness. And I think that's an absolutely accurate statement. We're not willing to do what they needed to do. All right, thanks, folks. See you next week.